door to the chapel was jammed. No one dared to open it, although for several days a thick, pungent smell of decay had been coming from inside, as if a pig had been locked in the altar and was slowly turning to dust. Archpriest Bernard, the only one of the clergy who had not yet fled, clenched his sleeve in his fist and pressed it to his face as he said, "He's still there, he's rotting, and we must pray." But there were no worshippers left. Bishop René de Meaux died, as recorded in Canon Etienne's diary, on the night of June 6th. He died suddenly, in his chair, with a swollen neck, a blue tongue, and bile on his chin. He choked on pus, Etienne noted, and blood boiled from his ear as if someone were breathing inside his skull. Death came to him with fever, with screams, with spittle on the crucifix, and with an unsealed will. The problem was that the body could not be touched. The palace nobility, the southern chapters and western abbots, demanded an autopsy and confirmation of the naturalness of the outcome. But the city magistrate refused. The streets of Avignon were rife with rumors of leprosy, and bakers closed their shops if anyone sneezed near their doorways. "We don't need a new plague," said the city surgeon Lambert, removing his hood at the town hall. And he added, looking at Seigneur Broliard, "Let them pierce it with a needle first, to make sure it doesn't swell." So the bishop remained in the chapel. No wax was lit on the body. His nostrils were not plugged. His jaw was not bound. He was laid in a white shroud on a cold stone, as was customary. But after 2 days, his fingers began to move, not because of a miracle, but because of gas building up in his abdomen. "Let him remain here until the reply from Rome arrives," insisted the abbot of the monastery of Saint-Julien. But no reply came from Rome. On the 3rd day, the glass in the stained glass window above the deceased's head burst from the pressure inside. On the 5th day, the monks began to open the side doors to dispel the miasma of the corpse. On the 8th day, gray slime crept across the stone floor. From the clerk's report, "The dead man's skin has burst." It burst on his thigh and shoulders. Not blood flowed from the wound, but a thick liquid resembling wine that had been standing for 40 years. A fly that landed on his tongue couldn't be removed. Its leg had grown into it. This is a sign. It was not only the common people who were afraid. Archdeacon Bartholomew, who arrived to investigate, stayed in the building for 13 minutes, and afterwards drank vinegar all day, burned incense on his hands, and swore that he had seen the bishop's mouth move. Later, he recanted these words, but it was too late. He was removed from the liturgy and silently left for Clermont. In secret, according to the testimony of a junior servant, they tried to carry the deceased out through the south door, but when they lifted him up, steam came out of his stomach. One of the bearers fainted. Another dropped the body on the ground. The skin burst. Worms poured out. A servant, noticing this, ran out into the courtyard, shouting, "He's not dead! He's boiling from the inside!" The church council gathered the next day. It was recommended that the body be left until the end of the necessary period of post-mortem observation. But the real reason was fear. Rumors had come from Rome that the bishop had participated in secret night processions, during which human fat was poured on the body of the crucified, and if anyone touched him, lightning would strike. This was written in the report of Archpriest Joachim, rotten but protected. Meanwhile, panic was spreading throughout the city. People complained about the smell. It crept through the streets, penetrated houses, and ate into their clothes. Incense merchants raised their prices. Buckets of sulfur were placed under the windows of the chapel, but it did not help. On the 15th day, the walls were covered with sticky mold, and someone scratched above the main entrance, "The gates of hell are open." 23 days later, when the skin was already peeling off the cheeks, an old servant named Jean-Baptiste begged for permission to enter. He was deaf, almost blind, and believed he had to say his last prayers. He was let in. He stayed inside for 40 minutes. He came out silently. He fell down and died 2 days later, with the same swelling of the tongue as the bishop. After that, entered the chapel, the body was not buried. No church opened its windows onto that street. Even the cathedral bricked up the lower windows and ordered that no mass be celebrated within a radius of 100 paces. Only at night could you hear the floor creaking inside the building where the rotting corpse lay, and a voice whispering, as if in prayer, "Don't touch me, I'm not gone yet." On the 42nd day after the death of Bishop Renier de Moza, the church bells fell silent. At first, it was considered an accident. Supposedly, a cog had jammed in the old mechanism above the north tower, but it soon became clear that the bell ringers did not dare to enter the bell tower. They claimed that every night someone walks there as if in chains, and there are sounds like claws on stone. One of them, a young monk named Louis, said that he saw through a loophole a light flash in the chapel window, yellow and fleshy, like a fire inside a rotting belly. Reports began to arrive more and more frequently. From the monastery of St. Paul, located 2 blocks away, came a report of 3 brothers falling ill with vomiting, bloody spots on their chests, and fever. One of them, Brother Arno, allegedly repeated before his death, "He is within the walls. He is spreading. We are breathing him." At a meeting of the chapter, it was decided to invite the oldest anatomist in Avignon, Dr. Foran de la Scala. He was brought at midnight, accompanied by 2 armed monks and a pharmacist. He spent less than half an hour in the chapel. By his own admission, "I did not perform an autopsy. It is impossible. He fell apart on his own. In the abdominal cavity were intestines swollen to the size of a baby's head. The liver had spread over the stone. The skin on the legs was swollen and empty, like bags. The eyes were sunken and blackened. I saw movement under the ribs, and I dare not say that it was only worms." That same night, Dr. de la Scala burned his gloves and went into exile. He left a note. "He is not dead. He remains. He has absorbed the walls and now waits." Rumors swept through the city. People said that at night, smoke could be seen streaming from the stained glass windows of the chapel on the Saint-Benoît Bridge opposite the cathedral, that the sandstone walls had turned grey and crumbly like meat, that one of the nuns who walked around the building had started losing her teeth and her ears were emitting a foul odor. The church council met for the last time on the 46th day. Archbishop Thibaut de Frie presided. He was pale, spoke softly, and sat clutching a crucifix as if it were a handle. "Brothers," he said, "we are facing a terrible omen. If it is leprosy, it cannot be stopped. If it is the plague, we are too late. If it is a curse, it must not be disturbed." It was decided to seal the chapel. By noon, it was surrounded by slabs. The windows were boarded up, and the doors were locked with chains. The walls were smeared with a mixture of wax, mercury, and clay. The monks left a bowl of rooster blood, 3 incense burners, and a bundle of hair, supposedly cut from the dead bishop on the day of his ordination, at the entrance. But the curse did not disappear. 3 days later, on the other side of town, a fire broke out in a pilgrim's shelter. Everyone burned to death, including 14 sick people, a baby, and the abbess. The only thing left was a charred note found at the entrance. "He does not forgive." Strange events began to occur in the houses near the chapel. Animals began to foam at the mouth. People complained of black dreams. An incense merchant screamed in his sleep, fell out of a window, and crashed to his death, clutching a jar of myrrh to his chest. Larvae were found inside. Another, an apothecary from Lion Street, burned all his possessions and confessed. "He told me that I would rot too. I heard him singing psalms from inside the walls." The testimony of the scribe Isaac de Nuy states, "The smell penetrated the archives. The ink on the parchment swelled like boils. One of the books began to move. The word veritas began to spread across the page like pus on fabric. We stopped reading. The church lost control. Even the papal envoys avoided the subject. The cardinal from Besançon, who had arrived with the seal to officially declare the bishop excommunicated from holy burial, disappeared. His carriage was found at the gate, empty, with no signs of a struggle. Only one exclamation mark remained in the dust, as if someone had glanced back at the last moment and never looked back. People began to fear the very word bishop. Children were taught not to pronounce the name Renier. Religious processions bypassed the neighborhood, and on the 49th day, the monks walled up not only the chapel, but also the adjacent courtyard, closed the entrance to the gallery, and carved one word with a knife on all the entrances: stink. The city fell silent. Services in the cathedral ceased. Even the bell ringers no longer rang the bells. Only at night, when the wind blew from the south, could one hear something scraping in the depths of the abandoned monastery, like a claw on marble, like a tongue on parched lips. On the 50th day, Avignon seemed to be plunged into a state of paralysis. No candles were lit in the churches. Sheaves of grass, sprinkled with vinegar, appeared at the entrances to houses. Crosses carved from aspen boards hung outside the windows. Doctors were no longer called. It was believed that touching the body of a dying person, even by mistake, would bring a curse. People said that the air itself had become denser, like a liquid saturated with pleas and fear. People were afraid to breathe near the south wall of the pulpit, where the chapel was located, sealed with gray wax. Some claimed to hear breathing coming from inside the stone. Others said that the sounds of prayers were absorbed into the walls, distorting them into incoherent moans. Archivist Jean Clermont wrote in his diary, "His flesh must now be part of the limestone. He is not rotting in his coffin, but in the city itself, like a tumor under the skin of a saint." At a meeting of the Brotherhood, it was proposed that the body be removed, but to do so would mean breaking the seals and the curse. The senior inquisitor, Hugo de Mora, opposed this. He declared, "That which has died without absolution lives in its death. Whoever disturbs its decay disturbs its soul, and it is already a stranger." Despite this, 3 priests, Father Mathieu, Brother Simon, and the young Vicar Alain, decided to open the coffin. At night, they broke into the chapel through the basement. In the morning, they were found in the crypt. Mathieu's face had been skinned. Simon lay clutching a crucifix, his teeth broken. Alain had disappeared. On the floor was a bloody handprint with fingers longer than a human's and no nails. Water appeared in the crypt. It smelled of meat. The flow reached the street, spreading toward the bridge. People who stepped in it began to itch, and some of their feet swelled up. A boy, playing near a locked door, began to cry and scream that someone is calling from under the ground, and that someone has no eyes. The apothecary Daniel Montfort recorded the following in his diary that day: "The shadow of the cathedral has grown darker. I compared it to other buildings, which cast normal shadows, but the cathedral seems to be carved out of black mud. There is no light in it. It is now a different time there." The nuns from the shelter began to have the same dreams. In them, as the abbess Sophie wrote, an old man without a jaw sings psalms in a foreign language and feeds babies from his breast with pus. These visions were accompanied by bleeding and fainting. One of the sisters had to be tied up. She was trying to cut out her tongue, repeating, "I don't want to hear him pray anymore." On the 61st day, a crowd gathered at the cathedral. Some brought barrels of oil, others brought torches. The people wanted to burn down the chapel, but Archbishop Thibault stood before them, holding a baby's skull in his outstretched arms, and said, "Let heaven judge him, not the earth. We have no right to interfere with death, if death does not come." They shouted at him, but the fire was never lit. That same evening, all the birds in the city died. The winds brought a sweet smell. It did not come from inside, but seemed to come from under the ground, from the very foundations of the cathedral. The stone cracked, and the walls settled. A stain appeared on the facade, resembling the silhouette of a head. without a mouth, but with empty eye sockets. Someone sprinkled wine on it, and it hissed. The servants stopped going up to the bell towers. The keys had been thrown into the river. Someone wrote in blood on the cathedral gates, "He is the Holy One. He must not be touched, but he must not be left behind." The city waited. Silence reigned in the houses. People no longer went out at night. Only monks in hoods, their heads covered with ashes, walked the streets carrying lit lamps, but not praying, silently counting their steps. The bishop was dead, but he remained, like poison in the blood of the city, like pain in a body that no longer needs a head. In the 7th week after the bishop's death, the cathedral was officially closed. The order was signed by the pontiff himself, who was in Avignon under the protection of the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre. The text, which was not read aloud, said, "A church ceases to be a place of prayer if it is inhabited by flesh separated from heaven." This was not simply an act of alienation of sacred objects. It was an admission that the stench had crossed physical boundaries, that the pulpit was now not a temple, but a vessel. The corpse juice continued to ooze from the basement. The stone slabs near the altar turned black, and tiny white mushrooms appeared around the edges. No one touched them, but every evening they glowed with a dull, oily light. No one could stay there for more than 10 minutes. People's noses bled, and they began to vomit. The doctors who examined the site burned their clothes and renounced their order. In their words, "This is not death. This is a state in which death has grown tired of dying." Deacon Benoit's testimony describes how footsteps could be heard at night, heavy, slow, as if bare feet were walking on lead. One evening, he saw a silhouette in a bishop's robe standing on the balcony above the entrance to the cathedral. The face was not visible, only the folds of fabric over which black flies crawled. The coffin was never found. After the crypt was opened, it seemed to have disappeared. Those who entered the chapel said that the stone at the base had sunk, and a depression had formed in the center of the hall. Beneath it was emptiness, from which a humming sound emanated. Descriptions varied. Some heard singing, others heard screams. But everyone agreed on one thing. A cold wind blew from the hole, like from a mouth opening with its last breath. The city began to die. Houses were abandoned. People left. Priests kept silent about what had happened. They did not mention the bishop's name in their sermons. His portrait was burned, and records of his ordination were deleted. Only a stone remained on the wall with the inscription, "Those who remain do not belong to the living." On the 60th day, a boy, the miller's son, entered the cathedral. He was found in the chapel, sitting by a black hollow. He repeated the same thing over and over. "He speaks from within. He prays backwards. He calls me into his belly." The child soon went blind. His tongue turned black and fell off. He died 3 days later. The city authorities decided to wall up the cathedral. Everything inside was left behind: the altars, the books, and the relics. The masons were not baptized. A marble slab without any inscriptions was laid at the entrance. It was supposed to cover the hole. A week later, it cracked. The smell returned. Later, in the chronicles of the monastery of Saint-Justine, the following mention appeared: "The sorrow is not that he was not buried. The sorrow is that he did not want to be buried, because then his flesh would have ceased to be part of the holy rite, and he would have become dust like everyone else. But he chose the path of defilement, to be a body that defied decay, like bread that rejected mold but absorbed the voice of anger." Rumors spread far beyond Avignon. Envoys from Naples demanded that the entire building be burned down. A delegation from Rome brought an icon to purify the air. The locals did not open the doors to them. The last witness mentioned that the walls of the cathedral moved during the full moon. One night, according to him, a single blow sounded from the dead bell, and then not a sound. Years later, the pulpit collapsed. In its place was an empty stone-paved square. No priest ever celebrated Mass there. No bird ever landed on the former cross. People whispered, "The smell remains." But now it's inside us,